Welcome to the Manaverse Podcast. I'm your host, Tom Travelin, and this is the podcast where we explore what it takes to build a successful, friendly local game store. Let's talk seriously for a few minutes today. Let's zoom out and take a look at the world right now. People are lonelier than ever. In the US, nearly 1 in 3 adults reports feeling lonely on a weekly basis, with young adults and single individuals being particularly affected. Loneliness has been linked to serious health issues, including a 29% increased risk of heart disease, a 32% increased risk of stroke, and a 50% increased risk of developing dementia in older adults. Additionally, loneliness doubles the risk of developing depression. It is a mostly silent epidemic, but with real human costs. And so across the board, we are pretty lonely as a society right now. We are also more fractured and divided than ever. I was born in 1986, so I can only really speak from experience for the last 30 years or so. And maybe listeners who grew up in the 60s would say that that era was worse for division, but there is no arguing that society is divided into opposing camps today, potentially multiple opposing camps. Politics for the last 8 to 12 years has been gradually getting more and more extreme. Economic pressures have been mounting for decades, adding a lot of stress to people's lives. Wages are stagnant, costs in nearly every area of life are increasing, and for many young people, the future looks bleak. Throw in COVID and the pandemic lockdowns, and it has been a tough start to the 21st century. We are the most well-fed, educated, technologically advanced society in history, but by many metrics, we are also the most miserable in terms of general human welfare. I'm going to share a real quick story for some context. I am a nerd. Who would have guessed? I know. I have been a nerd my entire life, as far as I can remember. I played video games, Magic, and Warhammer growing up, and I wasn't ever really interested in sports or cars or any of that usual stuff. I didn't drink, I didn't smoke, I still don't, and I generally disliked parties in high school. I would much rather go hang out with a few close friends at a LAN party playing Halo and StarCraft and testing Magic decks than to go to a bar. I am decidedly an introvert. And there were moments of loneliness and isolation in my younger life. If it weren't for the friends that I made when I was young, I am pretty confident I would have continued down that path, and I would be a much more angry and bitter person than I am now. I probably wouldn't have my awesome wife and kids, who I love deeply, and I certainly wouldn't be recording this podcast. I owe so much to my friend group that it's hard to quantify. And I wouldn't have met those friends if it weren't for a local game store a kid down the street told me about one day when I was 12 years old. So Dave was a couple years older than me, and he discovered this store downtown that sold Magic cards. I played Magic with my best friend a little bit over a year before when we both asked our parents for a 5th edition tournament pack. We didn't really know what we were doing or how to play properly, but that was my first exposure to the idea of a trading card game, and I was hooked. Being kids, we didn't dive in right away. We didn't really have money to buy new cards, so Magic fell by the wayside for a little bit. But one day, about a year later, Dave proposes we bike to the store that he found called Deja Vu Games. So we hopped on our bikes and we made the 30-minute ride to downtown Kitchener to take a look at this place. And almost 30 years later, I can still remember the tiny details of the place. The Magic poster on the wall near the front door that talked about how F&M was part of the path to getting on the Pro Tour. Not that I knew what any of those things were back then. I remember the 8-seater fold-out table to the left and the dark tablecloths that they used during drafts. I remember the small cash wrap section with a selection of cards that I'd never seen before under the glass. I remember the boxes of Urza Saga, Tempest, Stronghold, and Exodus behind the counter on the shelves. And I remember they even had a box of Alliances up there. I remember the humming of the Coke fridge next to the remaining pair of 8-seater tables that occupied the rest of the store and the teeny tiny back office area that was behind that. So if you're following along, I am describing a very small store that would have fit the gamer dungeon description very well. It was even a basement unit. Not to throw any shade on this place. I love this. But to me, it was a magical place. Pun fully intended. I was enamored by the game and the cards and the experience of opening booster packs and finding something new and exciting inside. All of it. To me, Deja Vu Games was my nerd heaven. And once I was in high school, not long after that, I spent nearly every single day at the store. I went to school downtown, so my routine became get up, get on the bus, go to classes, get out of school, and then walk down to the shop, hang out for 2 to 3 hours, then head home for dinner. And I rinsed and repeated that 5 nights a week, and I did that for 2 years straight until my high school moved to another part of town. And in those 2 years, I met all of the kids and people who would make up my core circle of friends for the next 25 years or so. I met future business partners. I met the guys who would eventually introduce me to my future wife. For a nerd like me, Deja Vu Games was the space that I needed to connect with people. And I've talked a fair bit about this on the podcast, about how tabletop games are not just fun, they're good, intrinsically, morally good. And Lynn Pochian advocates this quite a bit. Tabletop games help with mental health and brain function. They teach kids new skills like strategy, negotiation, math, reading, creativity, and lateral thinking. They're good for the young and the old. And there are a ton of good reasons to make games, play games, and sell games to more people. They enhance people's lives in so many ways. And I've felt this way for a long, long time. But I want game store owners to feel this, in their soul. You're not just selling mindless entertainment or distractions. You're giving your customers the means to connect with other human beings, to discover joy in their life, and then share it with someone. You're selling them health and happiness in a myriad of different forms. And those are core needs for every single person on the planet. I recently asked what the best part of being a game store owner is in the Opening a Tabletop Game Store Facebook group, and I got a flood of great answers. John Coviello said that he sells happiness in a box. Rob Gruber said it's the positive impact that he gets to have on his small remote community, and the thanks and appreciation that he gets from so many families, parents, and kids for what he does. Tony Vanderberg said, knowing that you are instrumental in the fun of thousands of people. And Aaron Marshall said, affecting communities in real and impactful ways that sync with your values. And Robin Louie said, bringing joy and wonder to the world. Also, she really likes shopping for nerdy stuff. Who doesn't, right? There were a ton of other great answers. And if you want to spread the positivity a bit further, I recommend you add the thread with your own answer. And these are all certainly great reasons for why running a game store can be awesome. But in this episode, I wanted to expand just a tiny bit further than that. I think game stores can save the world. That may be a bit grandiose, but hear me out for a little bit. Almost more than anything right now, people need connection. Society needs spaces where people meet other people across cultural and class barriers. Game stores are unique in this regard. The social component of playing a game necessitates meeting someone, communicating with them, figuring out how to cooperate with them, and in ways that no other institution or business really does. The closest comparison would be school. In school, we socialize, but the main purpose is to learn, theoretically. It's the teacher mostly communicating knowledge in one direction to the students. And school only lasts typically until we're in our early 20s. Beyond that age, we're largely on our own. So what do we do for people who are out of school, right? At work, we socialize, but too much of that and your job could be at risk. It's not really an environment that encourages human connection, at least for most people. I'm sure there's an exception with some jobs, but that's far from the norm. And work makes up the vast majority of adult life. Then there are bars and clubs, but those are mainly 20 to 30-year-olds getting drunk and yelling at each other to be heard over the overly loud music. The goal there is often also a different kind of human connection, but that is often pretty fleeting as well. Libraries. I love libraries. Libraries are great, but I don't usually go there to meet someone new. People go to libraries for a quiet place to read, to find a new book, or to get some work done, maybe. It's mainly a social activity. Cafes. Cafes are a great place to meet people that you already know and spend some time with them, but they're not really great for connecting with someone new. The barista might know your name and your favorite drink, but that's usually as far as it goes. And the rest of the patrons are either just stopping by, They're, focused on deepening their connection with their existing relationships, or they're just quietly enjoying their treat. Sometimes you'll find someone at the bar who's interested in getting to know someone new, but that's the exception and it's not the rule. The nature of tabletop games and the community space in a game store is truly special, in my opinion. It's a way of forging those human connections that removes the awkwardness of meeting someone for the first time. They bring together people from all walks of life, from nearly every social and economic class, from every background, every identity, and every persuasion. Those people know they have at least one shared interest that they're passionate about, that being the game that's being played between them at the minimum, and the structure of the play encourages a shared understanding and communication. The nature of isolation, of loneliness, and depression is self-reinforcing. Being part of a community breaks that loop, and it replaces it with another one, a positive reinforcement. And I know this firsthand. We are what we do. It's not the other way around. By going to a game store and playing at an event and having conversations and creating connections, we become the sort of person who does those things. Our identity is shaped by our actions, and this is how habits are formed, both good and bad. Society becomes more cohesive, connected, and happy, one positive social interaction at a time. And game stores are community hubs that can make that happen all over the world. Imagine with me a world where there is a clean, friendly, expertly run local game store in nearly every single community, appealing to more than just the gamers. They attract the moms, the kids, the older people, the sports fans, the blue-collar tradespeople, the wealthy, the less so, and they help them meet and engage each other with a variety of organized play programs, game nights, paint nights, puzzle parties, role-playing sessions, a variety of other events. And this is happening across the world. As each store becomes a pillar and part of the social foundation for its local community, those businesses thrive and those communities become more tightly knit. It's not always correlated to those two things, but there's a very good chance of that occurring. There will be a lot less hate and division, I believe, and a lot more open-mindedness and willingness to work together to solve all of these problems that we're all facing. And I think a lot less loneliness in the world. I truly believe we'd be living in a much merrier place. But that's just my theory. I want to know what you think. Thanks for listening to my ramble today. I've been thinking about this topic for a while and trying to get all my thoughts out in a way that are coherent and hopefully conveys what I'm trying to get across. But I want to know how you feel about this as well. And if you like this sort of topic, if you like this sort of content and you want to learn more about building a successful, friendly local game store and the subject of being in the game trade, make sure you like and subscribe. And if you want your game store featured on the show, reach out to me at tom@manaversesaga.com. Link will be in the show notes and all that. And maybe you will be in the next episode of the Manaverse Podcast. But that's it for me tonight, today, this afternoon. I'll see you next time.